Good day, and today we're going to talk about the British Romantic poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He was an English lyrical poet, critic, and philosopher whose lyrical ballads, written with his friend Wordsworth, started the English Romantic movement. Now, although Coleridge's poetic achievement was small in quantity, his metaphysical anxiety anticipating modern existentialism has gained him reputation as an authentic visionary. Now, in Cambridge, Coleridge met the radical future poet laureate Robert Southey in 1794. Coleridge moved with him to Bristol to establish a community, but the plan failed. In 1795, he married the sister of Southey's fiancée, Sarah Fricker, whom he did not really love. Now, when we look at him working with William Wordsworth, Coleridge's collections, Poems on Various Subjects, was published in 1796, and in 1797 it appeared in Poems. In the same year began the publication of a short-lived liberal political periodical called The Watchman. And at this time, he started a close friendship with Dorothy and William Wordsworth. Wordsworth was one of the most fruitful creative relationships with Coleridge in English literature. From this relationship, it resulted in lyrical ballads, which opened with Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner and ended with Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey. These poems set a new style by using everyday language and fresh ways of looking at nature. Let's start by looking at Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. This 625-line ballad is among his essential works. It tells of a sailor who kills an albatross, and for that crime against nature endures terrible punishments. The ship upon which the mariner serves is now trapped in a frozen sea. An albatross comes to the aid of the ship, and it saves everyone, and stays with the ship until the mariner shoots it with his crossbow. So this motiveless malignity, this terrible thing, leads to a punishment. And now there came both mist and show, and it grew wondrous cold, and ice mast high came floating by, as green as emerald. Now after a ghost ship passes, the crew begin to die, but the mariner is eventually rescued. He knows his penance will continue, and he is only a machine for dictating always this one story. Now, disenchanted with the political developments in France, Coleridge will visit Germany in 1798 and 99 with the Wordsworths, and he became interested in the works of Immanuel Kant. He studied philosophy at Göttingen University and mastered German. Then, in 1799, Coleridge fell in love with Sarah Hutchinson, the sister of Wordsworth's future wife, to whom he devoted his work Dejection and Ode in 1802. During these years, Coleridge also began to compile his notebooks, his daily meditations of his life. At this point, suffering from neurologic and rheumatic pains, Coleridge had become addicted to opium, which was freely prescribed by physicians at the time. In 1804, he sailed to Malta in search of better health, and he worked 2 years as a secretary to the governor of Malta, and later traveled through Sicily and Italy, finally then returning to England. Now, from 1808 to 1818, he gave several lectures, chiefly in London, and was considered the greatest of Shakespearean critics. Now, when he is on his opium, we do see Coleridge creating Kublai Khan, and he says it was inspired by a dream. Now, in the summer of 1797, the author had retired to a lonely farmhouse between Porlock and Linton. He had taken anodyne, and after 3 hours' sleep, he woke up with a clear image of the poem. Disturbed by a visitor, he lost the vision, with the exception of some 8 or 10 scattered lines and images. Now, modern scholarship is skeptical of Coleridge's story, but it reflects Coleridge's problems to manage practical life and to finish his ideas. Now, the following fragment is here published at the request of a poet of great and deserved celebrity, Lord Byron, and as far as the author's own opinions are concerned, rather as a psychological curiosity than on the ground of any supposed poetic merits. In the summer of 1797, the author, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he's speaking about himself, then in ill health, had retired to a lonely farmhouse between Porlock and Linton on the Exmoor confines of Somerset and Devonshire. In consequence of a slight indisposition, an anodyne had been prescribed, from the effects of which he fell asleep in his chair at the moment that he was reading the following sentence, or words of the same substance, in Purchas's Pilgrimage. Here the Khan Kubla commanded a palace to be built, and a stately garden thereunto, and thus 10 miles of fertile ground were enclosed with a wall. The author, Coleridge, continued for about 3 hours in a profound sleep, at least of the external senses, during which time he has the most vivid confidence that he could not have composed less than from 200 or 300 lines. If that indeed can be called composition, in which all the images rose up before him as things, with a parallel production of the correspondent expressions, without any sensation or consciousness of effort. On awakening, he appeared to himself to have a distinct recollection of the whole, and taking his pen, ink, and paper, instantly and eagerly wrote down the lines that are here preserved. Now at this moment, Coleridge, he was unfortunately called out by a person on business from Porlock, and detained by him above an hour, and on his return to his room found to his no small surprise and mortification that though he still retained some vague and dim recollection of the general purport of the vision, yet with the exception of some 8 or 10 scattered lines and images, all the rest had passed away, like the images on a surface of a stream into which a stone has been cast, but alas, without the after restoration of the latter. Now a bit about the history. Kublai Khan was the 5th of the Mongol great Khans and the founder of the Yuan dynasty in China, which is about 1279 to 1368. He's best known in the West as the Kublai Khan of Marco Polo. Kublai founded what was intended to be his brother's new capital, but became in effect his own summer residence, the town of Kaiping. It later was named Shangtu, or Upper Capital, and was immortalized as the Xanadu of Coleridge's poem. Now, the chant-like musical incantations of Kubla Khan result from Coleridge's masterful use of iambic tetrameter and the alternating rhyme schemes. For example, the first stanza is written in tetrameter with a rhyme scheme of ABA, ABC, CDE, DE, alternating between staggered rhythms and couplets. The second stanza expands into tetrameter and follows roughly the same rhyming pattern, but it's expanded. ABA, ABC, but then it expands to CCDD, FFGG, HI, IH, JJ. Now the third stanza tightens into tetrameter and rhymes AB, AB, CC. And the fourth stanza continues the tetrameter of the third and final rhymes ABC, CBD, EDE, FGF, FFG, HHG. Now, in Kubla Khan, Samuel Taylor Coleridge employs a superficially loose and disjointed construction, which is actually carefully designed to trigger associations of imagery that produce mental echoes of juxtaposed impressions. The lack of a consistent rhyme scheme, the uneven division of stanzas, and the use of iambic meter with a varying number of feet all contribute to a sense of disorientation, which in turn facilitates the process of mental echoing. The most important element of this effect, however, are the images themselves. For example, in stanza 4, it is thought that the final stanza of the poem, thematizing the idea of the lost vision through the figure of the damsel with the dulcimer and the milk of paradise, was written post-interruption. The mysterious person from Porlock is one of the most notorious and enigmatic figures in Coleridge's biography. No one knows who this person was, or why he disturbed the poet, or what he wanted, or indeed, whether any of Coleridge's story is even actually true. But the person from Porlock has become a metaphor for a malicious interruption the world throws in the way of inspiration and genius. And Kubla Khan, strange and ambiguous as it is, has become what is perhaps the definitive statement on the obstruction and thwarting of the visionary genius. Now, as we continue on after Kubla Khan, in 1810, Coleridge's friendship with Wordsworth came to a crisis, and the two poets never fully returned to the relationship they had earlier. During the following years, Coleridge lived in London, on the verge of suicide. After a physical and spiritual crisis at the Greyhound Inn in Bath, he submitted himself to a series of medical regimes to free himself from opium. He found a permanent harbor in Highgate in the household of Dr. James Gilman, and enjoyed almost legendary reputation among the younger romantics. During this time, he rarely left the house. Now in 1816, the unfinished poems Christabel and Kubla Khan were published, and the next year appeared Sibylline Leaves. After 1817, Coleridge devoted himself to theological and political sociological works. His final position was that of a romantic conservative and Christian radical. He also contributed to several magazines, among them Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine. Coleridge was also elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature in 1824. And then finally, Samuel Taylor Coleridge died in Highgate, near London, on July 25, 1834. Now, Wordsworth is clearly more entitled than Coleridge to be considered the leader in creating and also in expounding a new kind of poetry. And until Coleridge met Wordsworth, which was probably in 1795, he wrote in the manner which had been fashionable since the death of Milton, employing without hesitation all those poetic licenses which constituted what he later termed gaudy verse, and he did this with contempt. If one reads Coleridge's early poems in chronological order, one will perceive that gaudy verse persists until about the middle of 1795, and then quickly yields to the natural style that Wordsworth was practicing. Now, Coleridge's shorter meditative conversation poems proved to be the most influential of his work. Conversation poems are poems in which the speaker addresses his lines to a listener within the poem, generally a listener who has little voice of his own. Now, these might include quiet poems like This Lime Tree Bower, My Prison, and Frost at Midnight. They can also include strongly emotional poems like Dejection and The Pains of Sleep. Wordsworth immediately adopted the model of these poems and used it to compose several of his major poems. And then, through William Wordsworth, the conversation poem became a standard vehicle for English poetic expression, perhaps the most common approach among modern poets. Thank you so much for stopping by to learn about Samuel Taylor Coleridge. If you'd like me to cover the Kubla Khan or the Rime of the Ancient Mariner or perhaps some more Wordsworth poems, leave a comment down below. Let me know which poems you would like me to cover and summarize. And as always, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed. Take care.